So today we're going to be taking a look at what I think is a pretty interesting watch. It's from Alexander Shorokhoff. There's a brand out of Germany. They kind of make a little bit more avant-garde, interesting, random, kind of just unique pieces. And I like their designs. Not all of them are for me, but this one I think is really cool. So let's take a closer look. As a side note, I just started a Patreon. So if you want to come chat, I started a Discord group that'll be linked down below. I'm not taking money just to take money. It is all funds that are going to be used for giveaways, watches, straps, other stuff. So the more people, the cooler stuff I can give away. So hope to see you there. So we have a diameter of 39, lug to lug of 44.6, height of 10.9, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications, we're going to be looking at the ETA 2824 movement beating away in here with a nice customized hand engraved rotor. The movement itself is undecorated, but I'll take an undecorated standard ETA movement with a hand engraved rotor rather than a standard regular finished ETA any day. We do have a stainless steel case with a sapphire crystal on the front and back with inner AR coating on the sapphire on the front. We do feature nice heat blued hands here, which I think is very cool. We have 50 meters of stated water resistance with a regular just push-pull crown. And last but not least, this watch retails for about €1450. Relatively, usually when you see it in the US, if there are any US carriers, it's around $1,800 to $1,900. So price point may vary, but it's around there. So starting off with the dial here, and this is undoubtedly the star of the show, we have what has been dubbed the quote-unquote winter watch. This is supposed to represent a nice cold winter time with the branches of the leaves and the actual dusting of snow beneath it. So the dial itself is what they quote on the website is just being silver, but they use diamond dust used from the polishing of diamond gemstones, the byproduct of that, to kind of dust the dial in some in-house proprietary process. And it comes together to make this, which is very cool. What I love about it, and we'll zoom in a little bit closer to see this, but all the branches exist on a layer a little bit above the dial, and then the base dial is that diamond frosted texture. So as you move it around, not only do you get the leaves that come to life and go from a more metallic silver gray to a more bright gray, but you get the diamonds that kind of come out and play depending on the angle and depending on the light, of course. Looking a little bit more generally, we do have a all pretty much gray monotone dial, varying shades of gray, and then we have a index up here at this 12 o'clock, which is 60. It's kind of a trademark of Alexander Shorokhoff. They do that for almost all, if not all, of their watches. We have the 3 and 6 here as diamond markers, and then the 9 o'clock as the actual name plate for the brand, Alexander Shorokhoff, and that's really the dial there. We of course have the date at 6 with a white date window. For legibility, I don't mind it, at least it's symmetrically lined up, and it's a very clean watch. Of course, the star of the show is this tree pattern. It's a little abstract, it's a little artsy, it's a little illegible for some maybe, you know. Thankfully they went with blue hands, so it is a very legible in terms of the hands against the background of the dial, but it's not very easy to tell the time. Of course, here we have it at about 10:12, 10:13 or so, but of course you're not going to be able to tell time really down to the second or really down to the minute with any pure accuracy. So taking a look in natural light, we can see the watch takes on this little darker gray of a tone. The diamonds do pop out depending on the angle. It isn't super bright or in your face, which I like. It's subtle even though it has diamonds being used. And I think that's just a really cool aspect about the watch. In more shaded light, we see it takes on a more complete grayish tone. Depending on the angle, of course, the leaves and the branches still change color, but the diamonds become a little bit more subtler. Just depending on the angle, you can see them pop out a little bit, but it probably is the most vibrant in direct light, but you still do get that color play and that shiny play, I guess you could say, from the diamonds, which is nice. And on the wrist, the watch just looks great. You have all the tones that pop, you have the grays that kind of battle against each other and just look interesting, you have the blue of the hands that are sometimes black, you have the diamonds pop out here and there. It is just a watch that is dynamic depending on the angle, and it looks great. Zooming in here, we see some of the details come to life a little bit more, and what I think really pops out to me is this beautiful, beautiful handset that they went with here. We have this spade style handset, which I think is stylized a little bit to be more unique to Alexander Shorokhoff. Really beautiful bulbous minutes hand here, just a unique, almost hourglass-esque shape to it, and that beautiful spade hand that has a lot of bulbousness, has a lot of roundedness to it. It's not just a flat one-dimensional hand. There is curvature, and it is heat blued on top of all that, even down to the seconds hand, counterbalanced with that A for the Alexander Shorokhoff logo. Really is just a beautiful handset, and finished very well. I don't really see any imperfections on it. Maybe a little speck of dust there on the minute's hand, but nothing out of the ordinary or that wouldn't be expected for the price point. Looking at this base dial itself, you can see as I move it how those diamonds are incorporated in, kind of dusted in there. Little specks here and there that really change depending on what angle you get them at. It is a almost abstract pattern. They aren't pretty equally laid out, or they aren't laid out in some kind of geometric pattern or anything like that. So it doesn't glow equally, I guess you could say. Light hits it at different angles, light reflects at different angles, and it just is a unique watch that I think plays very well with the light. You can see everything isn't perfectly finished here. The only applied metal elements on the watch are a little bit roughly done. The 6 and the 0 both have imperfections and little scratches. There's nothing too glaring and major. It is relatively expected, but I think they could shape that up a little bit better, especially when the dial is the main focus point of this watch. Focusing a little bit too on this tree and these branches, it is so beautifully done. Again, I don't quite know exactly how it's done. They don't really state it very well on the website, which I think is a little bit to the detriment of the brand, because if you explained how you did this beautiful process, at least in some way, I think people would be into it. You have this beautiful, almost frosted texture that lives on the inside of the branched pattern. You have some of the leaves that branch out in that same frosted texture, some that are more black for the more outward leaves. It really is just a beautiful pattern. There's a little bit of sparkliness that changes depending on the light. I don't know if this is like a pure metal cutout that's laid on top or something similar to that, or a stamping process, but whatever it is, they incorporated a lot of life into it. It has a lot of changingness. It has a subtle sparkliness that ties in with the diamond dial. It really is just a beautiful execution of this pattern. I would wager to guess this is some kind of treated processed metal that is a little bit more sparkly than this plate here, because you can kind of see as I move things, they change at kind of the same rate and the same color tone. So as this is a metal plate, this is probably metal of some sort as well. Plate is done very well, no imperfections there. Really nicely done with the inky text as well. So there isn't really that much bad to say about the dial. I would say the hands having that imperfection, the 60 having that imperfection is a little sad to see, but it is what it is. I don't think it's anything too major, too glaring, so it can be forgiven a little bit. And then focusing for a second on the 6 and the 3, we of course have the diamonds incorporated as the markers there and this little kind of contraption to hold it. Interesting, I do like the little holder. It just is an interesting shape, and of course, I mean, the diamond is a diamond. I would prefer them not to be there because I think it would be a little bit cleaner look, but I know they kind of gear this watch in their mind, in their brand mentality towards women. But to be fair, not many women like diamonds on their watches as far as I know, so maybe you're not designing the watch perfectly well. And of course we have the little made in Germany done in between the little specks of diamond. You can kind of see there is a base gray dial that is laid with this little diamond mosaic pattern. So that's interesting. I really haven't noticed that before looking very closely like this. Overall, really well done dial, and I think just a lot of beautiful details to sink your teeth into. So moving on to the case of this watch, it's done very simply, and really the dial is the main star of the show, but it is very much something that lets the dial take star of the show. We do have mainly brushing from the top part. We do have vertical brushing on the sides of the case, and the case back is nothing really to write home about. The text done along the outboard of the sapphire is actually really nice, and then of course we do have that hand engraved rotor, which is a really cool touch. So those do get bonus points. And zooming in a little bit closer, we can see just that hand engraved rotor. Really nicely done, nice little detail, nice little touch to kind of customize the watch while not being too crazy, and just doing something a little out of the norm. The interesting part about this case is we have almost like a two-part bezel. We have this like little lip that follows perfectly and vertically, and then we have this very flat, high polished side along the edge here, kind of resting on the top of the case. It is an interesting point that I've never really seen a bezel do before. It's like an outboard bezel that shows you where the case is, and then it sinks in a little bit, and then a completely vertical bezel that really doesn't even pop out much unless you angle the watch. It's an interesting and unique way to do it. It almost has this kind of, cone shape to it. I don't mind it. I don't think it adds or detracts to the watch in any crazy way. I do like the way that the polish pops and kind of draws your eye in a little bit more towards that center dial, which is doing most of the talking. So nothing too crazy, nothing too bad, and I do think the case shape is very serviceable as it is. I will say it's nice to see the watch is fairly thin. Of course it is automatic. It's not like they could do it any much thinner, but it does wear well on wrist and you have a little bit of curvature in those lugs. And the signed crown is actually really well done. You have the logo of Alexander Shorokhoff actually written out on both sides of the crown. It looks nice, it's well done. It has a good knurling to it as well, so the winding is very easy. The actual time setting operation, smooth hands, date changes over easily, no problems with that ETA movement. So moving on to how this watch wears, earlier I was wearing this Zodiac Pineapple Dream here, and here we have the Shorokhoff sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. Now what I was just wearing was a 40mm diver, whereas this is more of a 39mm dress watch. But it relatively is thin in terms of the bezel and overall case, so you do get a lot of dial to the watch, and the dial itself, although there's a lot going on, is relatively spacious. There's not a lot of indices or rings or things like that cutting down on the perceived size of the dial, so it feels like a fairly big watch, but it's not big and it's not badly wearing. It's relatively short lug to lug. It feels very compact. It just is a lot of dial for the size. The handset pops beautifully at certain angles with that heat blue treatment. Again, the dial is very changing depending on what angle you have it at. It is just a pretty dynamic watch, dynamic dial, and pretty cool, unique pattern overall. On the wrist, you can see it wears fairly thin, doesn't rise up off the wrist at all. There aren't any sharp edges. The crown, even though I wear my watches up higher and it quote unquote digs, doesn't dig in too deeply or too harshly or to the point of pain. And then if I move the watch up a little bit on my wrist where I have closer to a 6-inch wrist, you can still see here, very proportional still, very close to the wrist. You can easily wear it on a smaller wrist as well. So it is a very nice wearing watch. And there it is from the side view. You can see it just perfectly conforms to your wrist, doesn't rise up at all, and it's just really nicely done. So before I move on to other straps, it's to note that this is not the original strap, although it pairs very well in my opinion. It's almost like this kind of distressed leather grain from Keepiece. I don't remember exactly what kind of leather. I believe it's Swift leather. So if you just reach out to Keepiece, I'm sure they can make you a strap in this material. But it came on this Stingray strap, which is quite a bold, quite an interesting combo for the watch, but let's put it on and see how it looks. So this is the strap that the watch originally came on, this very dark bluish gray Stingray. I think it is a cool combo. It's a little much, I think, and then it's also a little bit of a thicker strap. It doesn't conform super well out of the box, and it's not the most slim kind of strap for the watch, so it's not my preferred way to wear the watch, but it is definitely interesting coming from them, and that's what they decided to put it on to begin with. I think just a simple suede would have been a little bit better, but at least they kept the funkiness going even in the strap. So there we have it on wrist. It doesn't look terrible to me, but I do think there's a little bit of a better combo that exists out there. One interesting aspect about this watch is it actually does have two sets of lug holes, one near the edge, one very close to the case, which can be used for curved bars. It is interesting because it's already a fairly short lug to lug and a lug placement already, so maybe that's there just in case you have a bar that's too thick, or you just prefer the look of curved lug bars, but I don't think it's totally necessary. But it's nice that they included it. What can happen, for example, if there's a really thick strap like this Colareb one where you can see it's pretty thick on the ends, it will just rub against the bottom of the case. So you kind of have to just get it at the right angle to be able to actually wear it. So kind of fits like that where you don't want to really bring it above that point. There we have the Colareb strap on the wrist. Pretty good combo, nice little neutral tones. So not too shabby there. A very interesting strap that I've come across is this one from Hasnobounds. Has this interesting metallic sheen that changes as you move it around. And this one I think just ties in really well with the natural tones of the watch, especially the leaves. It just, I think, is the perfect monotone option that really color matches the watch. And there you have it on wrist, very cohesive. I think it would look a little bit better if this wasn't as dramatic of a taper. I do think like a 20 to 18 or possibly even a 20 to 20 would give a better stance to this watch, but I don't mind the 20 to 16. It just is a little thinner. But like I mentioned, when you move this watch around, there's these tones that come out that just perfectly match some of the tones that are on this strap here. And of course, the classic white arch silicone, bringing some brightness to that quote-unquote winter time of the dial. I think it looks great and very comfortable combo. Plants the watch super well on wrist, really just makes all the tones pop a little bit, and really, again, can't go wrong. So pros and cons of this watch, and undoubtedly the biggest pro for me is going to be the dial. It just is different, it's interesting, it's new, it's unique. I don't know what these tree branches leaves are really made out of, but I assume it's the stamping process. It's done very well. It has a lot of life to it. It changes when you move it. The whole dial just has a lot of life to it. It's very dynamic. The diamonds come out at certain angles, especially as you move it around. The leaves and branches definitely change color depending on the lighting situation or the angle. It's a beautiful, beautiful dial to look at and much more expensive feeling than the price point suggests. So they did an amazing job. And kind of somewhat related to the dial, the hands are beautifully executed. It's in wonderful shape. The heat bluing is a nice touch, and they just tie into the watch really well. Another pro I think is the watch just wears well. It's nice to see the watch being under 40 millimeters. It adds a classiness to that. And it's not too thick, wears pretty well on wrist. The case shape isn't really the main star of the show here. It's relatively straightforward, relatively nothing to write home about, but it stands as a nice blank canvas for the dial to really shine against. And last but not least, I think the watch just has a lot of X factor. It has a lot of uniqueness to it. It's from a brand that's a little bit less known. It has unique touches like the diamond dust dial and the hand engraved rotor. There is just a lot going for this watch that I think is very different from other watches in this price point. We're talking sub $2,000, and there's literally nothing you can get, as far as I know, at this level in that range. And what you are comparing it to is more simple or classic or traditional, where this is kind of off the beaten path and something I really appreciate. So moving on to cons, and while I don't have many, there are a couple, and one of the bigger ones is it's not a very readable watch. There's no delineation of where the hour markers are. You do have the 3, 6, and 9, and I guess technically the 12 also kind of partitioned out, but outside that, it's hard to tell which hour you're at. You can relatively read the time, so it's not a huge, bad thing about the watch, but if you're a stickler about accuracy, this is not the watch for you. Something that's not a huge con for me, but something is a kind of just point of contention I originally had with the watch is I don't love the plate logo at 9 o'clock. It was very odd at first to me. I don't know why they just didn't do something at 12 o'clock or made something more simple. Maybe they didn't want to ruin the base dial texture and wanted to add something on top of it. Again, 9 o'clock's an odd choice, but I've come to not mind it as much, and it's kind of one of those things where the more watches you have in the box, something that's unique stands out more because of that. Every other watch in the box has the name at 12, so when you have things like this, which is a little bit different, a little bit more off the beaten path, it's cool to see. As a true con for me, I really don't like the use of the diamonds on here, not the diamond dust, that's very awesome and what I think makes this watch so special, but the fact that they put diamonds at the 3 and the 6. When I saw this watch online, because I've always loved the design and loved the way it looked, the diamonds at 3 and 6 always put me off of buying the watch. And I just thought, it's odd, I don't like that, I'm not a big diamond person, and you're literally using the diamond as an index. It probably is pretty apparent. In person, it's much more subtle. I almost never noticed the diamonds, but I do think it would have been a cleaner watch without them. It's not like they would make the watch any more readable than it already is, so just forgo them, and I think the watch would look better. My last con with the watch, and it's maybe not a pure con, maybe more of a critique, is the fact that I do wish the watch was a little bit thinner. I do think that the dial and the design leads to like this classiness, this elegance, this beauty about the watch, and having it in a thicker, quote unquote, automatic format, to me is not the perfect form of this watch. If this was a manual wind, if it was as thin as possible, if it was a little bit more elegant because of all that, I think the entire watch would tie in better to itself. Is it bad in its current form? Not at all. It's convenient having a date, it's convenient it being automatic, but I do think its ultimate form is a little thinner, a little classier, a little bit more slim and elegant and just beautiful because of all that. So final thoughts on this watch, and I was pleasantly surprised, almost even blown away by it in person. As I mentioned, it's always a watch that I liked online. It's always a watch that I've considered buying, but I couldn't always quite pull the trigger. And I was lucky enough to finally see one in person, and after actually having hands-on with it, to me it was a no-brainer. It comes in a price point that, although while not an insignificant amount of money, it's very unique for everything else that's in that price point or what else you'd be spending that money on. You're getting a more simple watch like a Zodiac. You're getting something that maybe is from Oris. You're getting usually more tool-tastic things and not anything that's overly elegant, overly dressy, and overly interesting. I do like that Alexander Shorokhoff does things so differently than most. They use design elements you usually don't see. They go very out there with some of their designs. They do shapes and colors and just different things. You're not getting a diamond dust dial anywhere else in this price point. You're not getting this handset anywhere else in this price point. So there's just a lot of elements that I think are very nice for this watch as it exists, and if they interest you at all, it's harder to find something better to fit what this watch does well. Is it going to be for everybody? No, it has some odd design points like this 60 at the 12 o'clock, like the plaque at the 9 o'clock, like the diamonds that are on the dial. It's not going to be for everybody. Again, you can't even read the time very well, but I do love it as a almost pure art piece. It's pure art for the wrist is what almost the ultimate form of a watch is. Not many people use it to tell the time anymore, and when they do, it's not usually its primary function. You have a phone, you have other more accurate ways of telling the time. The watch is more of a convenience. So this watch takes watches into what they're meant to be, just beautiful pieces of art, beautiful forms of expression, something that you think maybe defines you or defines your collecting or defines what you like and your taste and all those crazy esoteric things. I just really enjoy this watch. I prefer dressier watches, and this fits that bill. It's beautifully dynamic. It has a lot of interesting aspects about it, and I do just think it's cool. But enough rambling and gushing from me. Those are my thoughts. Thank you as always for watching the video. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, you think I'm right, you think I'm wrong, put it all down below, and I'll see you in another one.